Hello, everybody, and welcome to an emergency podcast edition of Real Hawk Talk. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter at Hawk Blogger, and I'm joined this evening by Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons on Twitter. And Jeff, we're here to talk about this is why, if you haven't already, given the show a like and subscribe to the channel, this is why you got to do it, because you never know when the Seahawks are going to make a move that we need to talk about. And today is one of those days. Dayna O'Gorman at Dayna OG also joins us on the show. Jeff, let's start with you. Fill people in on what the news is of the day, what happened, and why are people here to hear about it?
The Seahawks made a trade, and a pretty big one. Funny enough, me and Brian have been throwing names at each other for a couple weeks now, just thinking of what that area. And 3 weeks ago, we texted each other about Leonard Williams. And the Seahawks pulled off a trade today for Leonard Williams. And it was not a cheap one. They gave up 2 draft picks, a second-round pick in this coming draft, and a fifth-round pick in the following draft, both to take on Leonard Williams, who is scheduled to be a free agent after the year and does not have a contract for beyond this season.
Dayna, you and I both love a good defense. Mm-hmm. How do you feel? How did you feel when you heard the news of this trade announced this afternoon? Or, kind of this morning.
Yeah, it was early. My initial thought was they actually did it. Like, I really didn't think that they would do anything. They're just not trade deadline people, right? Like, that's just not how it rolls usually. So I was thrilled that they actually, I was real surprised at first. And then I saw who it was and I was like, oh God, this is a Pete Carroll player. Like, it just made sense to me, and if you look, and I know we're going to talk about it. I know we're going to talk about, he's from USC and Pete's known him forever and like all of those things. But I was also really excited because this is the position we've been talking about forever, right? And they didn't train for an offensive lineman. They didn't go, after some other weird position. They actually went after the position of need. And so I was thrilled.
Love it. Jeff, how about you? Other than surprise, what was your initial reaction to this move?
I was taken back by just the sticker shock of the price. I got a text from you and Evan saying, like, was it just for a fifth? And I didn't know what you were talking about. I didn't see the tweet. So I'm like, a fifth? What happened? And then I look at it, and you're like, no, it was a second. And I was shocked because when we talked about Leonard Williams a couple weeks ago, we're like, well, he's going to be a rental player. He's probably going to cost a third or a fourth. And it brought back memories of the Sheldon Richardson trade. So I was still a little taken back by the price. Just watching the team the last few weeks, I still don't know if is this the time to buy a rental player. So a lot of my thoughts will change if they actually end up extending him. But I thought they overpaid. But don't get me wrong, I think Leonard Williams is a good player. There's a reason I brought him up to you. I think he fills exactly what this team needed. But I do think they overpaid.
Yeah. I love that. We'll get into it. And this is why, everyone's got these different reactions. My very first time I read the tweet, I saw 5th rounder for Leonard Williams. And I was like, I just talked about that last week. I was like, hey, if they do something stupid, like they take a 5th rounder for Leonard Williams, let's do it. And then I was like excited. And then I saw and a second. And I was like, whoa. That's a big difference. And I think there's a fair amount of nuance to this trade. So I think we'll get into it. We'll talk about some of the nuance there. But here was my take last week that I will repeat for people that missed it, and I still feel it this week. The Seattle Seahawks and this front office, John Schneider, Pete Carroll, 13 years of drafts, whatever it's been now since 2010. They have never, ever, not once drafted a single defensive tackle of the impact or talent level of Leonard Williams. Hasn't happened. They had an opportunity to draft potentially that impact tackle in the draft this year with Jalen Carter. They decided not to, and I think for good reason. And they went there and got a franchise-altering corner. But my general read was looking at this, thinking about free agency, thinking about draft. It is so hard to get an impact defensive tackle. I'm not talking about the elite of the elite, but an impact defensive tackle that I thought that the Seahawks needed to be looking for them whenever they could get them. And that included now. And that included Leonard Williams. So I think there is a way to look at this as actually that it was a reasonable price, especially if you're considering what they're spending out of their cap for this year and some other factors. There's ways to look at this as it was an expensive price, pretty obvious. But really what this comes down to is there's no doubt they added an impact defensive tackle and probably the most talented defensive tackle they've had on their roster since Michael Bennett, if you consider him a defensive tackle, although he played a lot of edge. And Leonard Williams can play all four spots. He can play edge. And one of the things we're going to talk about, there's some amazing film of Leonard Williams going up against Trent Williams of the 49ers and playing him pretty evenly. Like, we don't have a guy that can do that. We didn't have a guy. So look, let's get into it a little bit more about what this means, what the implications are. But for right now, it's safe to just be happy. That second round pick and that fifth round, that's tomorrow's problem. The extension and whether he signs, that's tomorrow's problem. Right now, this Seahawks team is considerably better than the team that's 5-2 yesterday, first place in the AFC West, second place in the NFC overall, just a game out of first. Right?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any argument to that, right, Jeff?
No. And one of the things that the Seahawks have done really, really well this year, just what they've gotten out of Jaron Reed and what they've gotten out of Mario Edwards. But the thing, if you truly analyze their roster, they were one injury away from a pretty disastrous situation. And if Jaron Reed got hurt and you got to play Miles Adams or Cameron Young, the man of snaps, after Mike Morris went down, they were really playing with fire in the way that position group was built. And they just completely solved the biggest roster issue for at least for this year. Because now if one of those guys gets hurt, you're totally okay. You basically have what you had yesterday. And like if you look at Mario Edwards, his productivity started to drop a little bit. He's probably playing too many snaps. And when you go up against that hellish schedule they have coming up with Philly and Dallas and the Niners twice and the Eagles, you can't be trotting out like a tired Jaron Reed and Mario Edwards, and that's all you got. So they just not only fixed their depth problem, they got a frontline player, and that makes those games a lot, like you said with Trent Williams. That changes, and Williams is not just like a physical; he is like a physical freak. Like he is long, he's big. Like if you watched his snaps against the Niners early this year, he looked like one of the best players on the field. So like if we're throwing out the price for a second, just talking about the impact of the player, he is a damn good player. He's not an elite. Dexter Lawrence is the elite guy in their team. He's a tier down from him. He's, I think, a better player than Draymond Jones. And they got a lot better at what I thought was a danger zone.
Dayna, I'm going to come to you in a second. We got a couple super chats here I want to get to. 12th Man North, thank you for the super chat, says, would have cost a third if New York Giants didn't eat the salary. Dayna, did you follow the salary stuff? Do you want to explain that for folks that don't? And thank you for the super chat, 12th Man North.
Yeah. So it was interesting what came out today between pressers and conversations between New York and Pete and everyone. It came out that there were multiple teams involved in these conversations. And the Seattle Seahawks had been talking to them for a few weeks about this player, apparently. So when they came out, and so what happened is there was $10 million left in guaranteed in his salary for this year for Williams. And what happened is there were multiple teams that had a third round pick, supposedly, on the table. And so Seattle wanted to bump above them. So the conversation happened that they would give them the second round pick if they ate the majority of the rest of that $10 million for this year. What is left for Seattle is the vet minimum, which is rated about $650,000. And the reason for that is Seattle has to pay him for playing for their team. So they can't not pay him anything. So the Giants are going to eat that, which is huge for Seattle. I think Seattle was at what, 7.5 million left in the cap. And so therefore that was a huge, they get this player for basically no money this year. Yes, they did have to bump up to the second to hop over those couple of other teams that had offers on the table. And so that's why they did it. And I know that there's a lot of people who are upset about that second round number. And Pete tried to explain it the best he could of, oh, well, but we have this extra third round. Well, yeah, but, sort of thing. But at the same time, this is a player they wanted. It was very interesting. And I'm sure we're going to talk more about this, but both Jamal Adams and Julian Love have played with him. And Nwosu played with him at USC. Pete has known, obviously, he loves those West Coast players. And so he was watching him for a long time. So this isn't a known entity as a person and as a player. And I think that's why they were so focused on him.
Yeah, I think those are all great call outs. So super chat from Michael Mathis, one of our most generous super chatters. Always appreciate it, Michael. He says, crazy trade. Time will tell if it's worth the draft picks we gave up. I think that's my take for now. Anyways, we're going to ignore the Athletic article and Pete Carroll flipping into whiteboards in this overall chaos. For right now, Michael, yes, we're not going to talk about the Pete Carroll article, although that might come up Wednesday at our normal slot. So that was a fantastic article. Thank you, Michael, for the super chat as always. One more super chat here from Will. Hopefully I'm pronouncing this right. Sladich. I like the trade for Pete. I like the trade. Pete isn't here for. I like the trade, period. Pete isn't here forever. And what is a second round pick if we time and time again have shown the inability to identify quality defensive line talent? I spent a second on proven talent there. I'll spend a second on proven talent. Yeah, that's kind of where my head's at. And look, where have they spent second round picks recently? They spent 2 second round picks on running backs. They spent a second round pick on Derek Hall, second round pick on Boye Mafe. Back in the day, they spent a second round pick on Jaron Reed, on Ethan Posick. We've seen second round picks on Malik McDowell, which would have potentially been their best defensive tackle and only good defensive tackle, like impact defensive tackle. We'll never know. So second round picks are valuable. DK Metcalf, second round pick, like they are valuable. So let's not get it twisted. But finding a good defensive tackle is really tough. And here's one of my reads. I think I said this earlier this year. I think John Schneider is not foolish. What did they do? They exited last season in the press conference. And what did they talk about that they needed to do? That they needed to get more physical, more dynamic on both sides of the ball. And we all was like, okay, great. There's a bunch of tackles for them to go after. And they didn't really go after them. And he knew Jalen Carter would have been a perfect fit, and they couldn't get themselves to feel okay drafting him. I think John Schneider, as soon as he took Devin Witherspoon, was like, I'm getting a defensive tackle too. It's going to happen. I don't know when, I don't know how, but I'm adding another one. And I think that's what happened today. In his mind, I think he got his cake and got to eat it too. And if you had said that somehow the Seahawks had drafted an impact defensive tackle with their last first round pick or second round pick, we would feel differently because it's a younger player, but it's just a need. This team really had a need for another player, and not just another guy, but a dynamic player on that interior line. Jeff, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah, no, you can't argue just like the on-field impact of it. It's just, there's a lot of fans now and a lot of people on Twitter now who start to think like GMs, and they evaluate things differently. It's one of the things that's so interesting about Twitter and why we all talk to each other. There's a lot of people who view it from the lens of a cap builder or a team builder, and they look at process. They don't just look at what the fan wants. And that's like the two parts of my brain that are conflicted. Because if you look at like the process of the trade, it's a big risk. And there are some people that are going to hate this trade, because we saw what happened with Sheldon Richardson. They traded a second round pick for Sheldon Richardson in a similar situation where they needed defensive linemen. He played okay, didn't sign here, and it turned out to be a complete waste. And Leonard Williams is 2 years older, I think, than Richardson was at the time they made the trade. And that part of my brain, and can't help but come back. And
Yeah.
I do wonder, is this the year you should be doing a rental player where you're sort of playing with house money still, and you still got such a young team, but at the same time, the NFC might never be this down again, and San Francisco is down. And
well, let's talk about that. I'm going to interrupt you there because this is the interesting thing. How do you all interpret this trade? I don't interpret this as a rental player, and I don't interpret it as a going all in move. I absolutely believe that they made this move with an eye on re-signing him, and that their point of view is he's going to go to a team with a great culture, a great locker room, which we just were talking about the Athletic article, that's going to be fighting for first place in their division, making the playoffs, and that he's going to re-sign with them. That's what I think. And I think they're expecting him to be part of their team over the next 3 years, at least. And this was the cost that they decided was worth making that move. But it sounds like, Jeff, before I get to you, Dan, it sounds like you think this is more potentially a rental.
I don't know if it's potentially a rental. I just think there's a significant risk of a rental. You can't franchise him because he's been franchised twice already by New York. So if you franchise tag him again, he's getting paid quarterback money, and that will destroy your cap. And there's another quarterback question lingering that we'll talk about another day. But it's just there's the risk of they can't come to a deal with him and he walks. And that's always a risk, and it could be I don't know if it's going to be a rental player. I think you have a 10-game sample. You see how he fits in. You see how he plays. And if they re-sign him and they get him back in a relatively not like devastating number, I think this has potential to be a very good trade. But if it's just a rental play and you end up in the same essential spot you were now, we're going to be pretty pissed about this in April.
Dayna, do you interpret this as a going all in, trying to win it all this year? Or do you think it's a more of a move with an eye on the next few years as well?
I think it's I think you're dead right on that number. I think it's the next 3 years. I think they have their eyeballs to get through, let's call it the Geno era or whatever we want to call it, or the Pete era. We only have him for so many more years too. And so I think this is a player that they actually wanted, that this is a player that they have wanted for a while. Maybe couldn't make it happen. Maybe he didn't want to leave New York when he went from the Jets to the Giants, and so that's where he was at. But you go from the worst team in football. Let's be quite honest. The Giants are an absolute disaster. They've had some locker room issues. Look what they're doing to Saquon Barkley, to a team who's known for a great locker room, for a good coach. He knows people there. He understands, the way that the position that they're asking him to play. I mean, he'll be able to step right in and play. It's not like the dude hasn't had to figure out new plays and new playbooks. He's had a different coach or a different, coordinator almost every damn year. So he's had to adapt a lot. So he's going to be able to step right into this. But I just feel like this is as excited as Pete was today. Now, granted, Pete gets excited about everything, but as excited as he was, and some of the things he was saying, to me, it was, they want this guy around. This feels like, and what you already mentioned, Brian, this feels like, a Michael Bennett, Cliff Averill type of a trade. That's what this feels like more toward me. Now, he is 29 years old. Did someone say he's actually younger than LJ Collier? I thought I saw that on Twitter somewhere.
He's
that
like a year older or something like that.
So funny, right? Yeah. But and so I just feel like this is something they like the way he plays, and he plays and can play in their scheme. And like you said, he's kind of a Swiss Army knife along that line. So let's keep him, and hopefully, and this is what Pete said. He said, hopefully he likes it enough here, he'll stay with us. And I think that says a lot.
Yeah, Jeff, a question for you. So, if the name's different, I'm going to give you some different names. Would you feel different? If it was, instead of Leonard Williams, if it was Eric Armstead, forget that he's on the 49ers and you're taking him from, but just as another player. If it was, instead of Leonard Williams, it was Grady Jarrett. If instead of Leonard Williams, it was DeForest Buckner. Any one of those three, do you feel differently about the deal?
DeForest Buckner. I think he's under contract for next year, and I seen the way he's taken over games on multiple teams, and I think they're similar in age. I think they're drafted the same year, and you're probably picking that for a reason.
Yeah, I am. All three of those guys, either Leonard Williams' age or older. Eric Armstead, that surprised me, actually. I forgot he was that he was that old. I thought he was younger. But 29, 30. From a pass rush perspective, I got to refresh this page, but from a pass rush perspective, Leonard Williams is going to be above all of those guys in terms of pressures. Let me just double check that. So, yes, he's actually one behind Javon Hargrave in pressures. Javon Hargrave is actually older than Leonard Williams. So actually, he's 4 behind Javon Hargrave. I was looking at Quinton Williams for a second, but yes, he's right there next to him. But yes, he's ahead of Eric Armstead. He's ahead of Kenny Clark, DeForest Buckner, Deron Payne, Grady Jarrett by quite a bit. So Vita Vea, another name we've talked about. So I think, if this had been a 25, 26-year-old Jeffrey Simmons, not you, but the one in Tennessee, if it had been Jonathan Allen from Washington, if you got a younger guy, even a Quinton Williams, like that's a little different, right?
Yeah,
so he's older.
On a heartbeat.
But I think that it's important for people to understand the kind of he's firmly in that second tier of defensive tackles. And he's right outside the top 5, I would say, top 6, 7 in terms of pass rushing disruptors on the interior line.
That's what's so good about it, because some of the deals they've swung and taken such big chances on, we all didn't like a lot of the price points, but they were very unique, like hard to fit in players like Percy Harvin and Jimmy Graham and even Jamal Adams to an extent. We're very unique, and we're not just like scheme transcendent players. And Leonard Williams is transcendent to a T, but you can basically put him in any front in the NFL and he's going to be a good player. And that's sort of where everyone will come back to a lot of those trades that didn't work out. But I always said, like, why didn't they just get offensive linemen or defensive linemen if they're going to spend all that capital? That's where their money should go. So now that they actually did trade for one of those guys, it's hard for me to be like, well, I shouldn't have done that. It was too expensive.
See, we're getting to him, Dayna. We're getting to him. I mean, Dayna, I'm going to go the opposite side for you. I'm kind of playing you two off each other in opposite ways here. So you can see why this will be potentially really positive for the team. What is your hesitation? Like, what is the reason, if you're making the case about why this is a potentially damaging move for the team? What comes to mind for you? Do you think about, like, is this going to be the first time in a while that the Seahawks make a big trade and it actually is worthwhile in the end?
Right. It's been a minute, right? I mean, let's be honest. I mean, some of these trades have been good but not good enough. Do you know what I mean? They're kind of sit right there. And so, I guess if you could look at the downside is only if they gave up so much for him and it's only for, 10 games, that it's not for any longer than that he doesn't sign again. But even that is hard because to argue in my little Pollyanna brain, because you look at how much Jarran Reed's played 68, 70% of snaps. He's going to get hurt. And so even that is hard to spin, that even for the 10 weeks, he's not going to, be helpful. But that's really the only downside of it. Maybe if he was coming from a different scheme or a scheme that didn't work or something, but it's hard because there are a lot of obvious positives to this. The only true negative will be is if they can't manage to re-sign him and then they gave up that second round pick for basically 10 games.
Yeah, a couple things I'll throw out for you guys that you may or may not know. And I'll give Doug Farrar credit for this. He wrote a really good article breaking down this trade. I initially thought, I was like, okay, I got to look at Leonard Williams from a lens of who he is as a player, what stats he's put up, what film he's put up. But then I have to just also remember he's playing next to Dexter Lawrence, one of the most dominant defensive tackles. Okay. How much is he just benefiting from that guy requiring double teams, triple teams, and Leonard Williams is just making hay. Well, I think what I remember, I'm not going to get the exact numbers right, but according to Farrar, Dexter Lawrence has been double teamed about 120 snaps, and Leonard Williams has been double teamed about 91. So Leonard Williams has been actually facing a fair amount of double teams. And so, I mean, I think that's a pretty good indication. He's also got a decent win rate in that situation. He's also, like we talked about, he's played multiple spots on the line. He can play every single spot on that line, including edge. So I think there's some interesting opportunity for the Seahawks to potentially force the offense's hand, because you can't just count on Leonard Williams being in the 1-tech or 0-tech spot where, you're going to be able to focus your blocking on him. If they slide him around and they then decide they need to double a certain place, that could open up a lot of things for other players. It could open up a lot of things for Boye Mafe has not been rushing next to, necessarily a super disruptive defensive tackle. And so, and the other thing that I think Doug Farrar brought up was interesting is Leonard Williams is particularly gifted in stunts, twists on the line where you've got the tackle going inside or outside and the edge player circling around. The Seahawks are doing that a ton this year. So one of the things I'm curious about, Jeff, do you feel any differently about this move now after seeing Jarran Reed play and kind of have a revival in Seattle, after seeing Mario Edwards playing above what we would have expected, after seeing Boye Mafe start to turn a corner? Do you think that you feel differently about the coaches like Clint Hurt, BT Jordan, anyone else identifying defensive line talent and knowing how to use them than you did 6 months ago? I kind of do, but I'm kind of curious for you.
I absolutely do. I think BT Jordan's been a really underrated addition to the whole staff, and what they've gotten out of Mafe and what they've gotten out of some of these guys. Like Jarran Reed was terrible last year in Green Bay. And the fact that they not only identified him, but have accentuated it, it's got to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. And if you look at everyone they've kind of let go, the Seahawks played Shelby Harris yesterday. Did you see him?
Nope.
I looked at PFF today. He played, I think, 19 snaps. There were very smart people begging the team to bring back Shelby Harris when he got released in the summer. We had some guys in our chat who were texting us every day, like, all we're gonna talk about is how bad this interior defensive line group is gonna be. I was one who said it would be slightly better than last year, but I didn't see this coming. So I think these guys have earned the benefit of the doubt. You look, Al Woods got hurt yesterday, unfortunately, but he has not been an impact player. He's 36 years old. Poona Ford has been functional the last couple of weeks at best. And all the guys they've decided to walk from and all the guys they've decided to bring in, I think you have to give them the benefit of the doubt. Clint Hurt, that's his thing. He's a defensive line guy. He went on Michael Shaw and Duger's podcast before he was the DC. He was really talking about how mad he was when they lost Jarran Reed and Frank Clark the first time. And they brought in Clowney, and you could see he didn't love a lot of those moves. And I don't know if he's getting more of the same personnel now, but they've made much better evaluations in that spot in the last 12 months when everyone was kind of criticizing all the turnover they did. So I think you can't not come to that conclusion.
Yeah, Dayna. I mean, we've been pretty hard on Clint Hurt and defensive coordinators over the years, and it feels warranted to spend at least a beat saying, well, you can't say that they're turning a corner and becoming one of the top 10 defenses and then not give any credit to the defensive coaches for doing that.
I think that Jeff hit it on the head. I don't think he had his people, right? Like, I don't think he had who he wanted playing. And maybe he had a, shorter leash because he was new at it. And, we all know Pete likes to control the defense a little bit. So I think that he has adapted to the players he had, which we didn't see last year at all. He got some players in there that he wanted. It does make you wonder how big of a hand he had in bringing back Reed and getting, DeMonte. But I don't know. It's just bringing in Jones. Sorry.
Draymond Jones. Yeah.
Yeah. Draymond Jones. So the thing of it is, to me, is that this team feels like on the defense that something clicked, a light switch went on. And I think that all the, her and all of the other coordinators deserve a lot of credit for that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that maybe Pete let him say, just let me do this. And he figured it out on his own, which would be very hard for Pete to do. And yet at the same time, I think we've seen him do that with offensive coordinators a ton. So maybe it was just time that he finally gave Hurt what he wanted. And it seems to be working out. Now, I still don't know because I still have PTSD and I'm a little bit nervous about what we saw yesterday out of the defense, which was a little choppy at times. But at the same time, we knew where the problem lay and they fixed that today.
Yeah.
Can I ask you guys a question?
Sure.
This is what's really interesting to me after our very interesting conversation we had in our group chat today. So here's my question to both of you. I want to know, who does bringing Leonard on, who I think does he go by Leo? I guess we're gonna have to find that out. Anyway, Williams on, who does that help the most on our line? Because in my mind, it's Reed, obviously, because he can rotate in and out. But at the same time, when you bring in a player of that caliber, he ends up helping everyone on the line. So who do you think he helps the most?
I'd probably say Dre Jones.
Really?
Dre's been the guy taking on a lot of the double teams. And he's not the kind of guy who's flashed like a lot of high profile. But if you watch their Seattle's film over the last 4 weeks, he's done a really good job handling double teams and opening things up. And you can see Boye Mafe has had that same stretch. And Dre Jones has done a lot of dirty work. He's not flashing a ton. He had a couple sacks here and there. But you mentioned for our stats where Leonard Williams had, I think, 92 double teams or something this year. Mm-hmm. If you get that guy in single coverage against guards, it's going to make things a lot easier for him. And it'll help Reed because he can manage his snaps a little bit. And he's playing a ton, and you're going to come to the stretch of games against so many good offensive lines. But I think Dre Jones is the guy who really benefits because you can now move these guys. You can play them in different gaps. You took a defensive line group that looked like a massive, massive problem, and now it's a pretty big strength.
Yeah, I love that, Jeff. Mm-hmm. And a note on Dre Jones, he had his best game in terms of pressures produced yesterday. 5 pressures yesterday. And to your point, they don't show up as counting stats like sacks in the same way, but pressures are usually a better indication of someone who's a good pass rusher. So nice to see that. He had 3 the game before against Arizona. So he's kind of started to come on a little bit. And you invested $17 million a year in this dude, the most they've ever paid on a free agent ever. And well, I guess outside of quarterback, but in any event, and what you might have done if things go exactly as you hope is you might have actually just turned that player loose. Like the investment that you made in Dre Jones, I think Dre Jones, we've all said it, is not on his own a massive difference maker. He's just not. He's not going to withstand that. But you put him next to a guy that commands a double team that is going to require a lot of focus. And all of a sudden, Dre Jones, I think, can be a big disruptor. So I think that's a great call out. I think, Dayna, you're right too. Jaron Reed just getting some rotation is going to be big. We also mentioned Mario Edwards, who's I think started to wear down a little bit. I think it helps all of them. But Dre Jones is a great call out. Let me do this super chat real quick, Dayna. Runaway, it's Lubu, says, damned if you do, damned if you don't type of trade. People said we needed interior defensive line help. We got it now. Giving up a second rounder just proves that JS believes we can go all the way this year. Thank you, Runaway. It's Lubu. You had another question, Dayna, or I didn't want to interrupt?
Well, no, I just think that this also is to go along with who it helps the most. I think then it helps us most in the NFC too, because what we've seen out of San Francisco the last 3 weeks, their defense is really struggling. Purdy is struggling, and Richard Sherman went off on it today in his podcast. If you haven't listened, you should. But I think then, like you said, I too saw them play against the Niners, and he did so well. So I think that what that does is I still don't know. We won't know until we see a few games in how he plays, but I don't know that it makes Seattle a contender for the Super Bowl this year, but it sure makes you feel like that wild card game or that first round is a lot more doable, especially after we see how they play against, San Francisco and Dallas, who is a little bit roller coastery, but still, is a good team. And so I hate to say that, yeah, it's like, oh, now they think we can go all the way. I don't know that. That's why I think it's more of a long-term investment. But at the same time, it makes you feel a lot better about some of those. Now, if we get the offense fixed, that'll be a whole different conversation we can talk about on Wednesday. But
Yeah, we'll talk about that another day.
Yeah.
So, Jeff, I want to come back to you on this. What has to happen for this deal to have been a good deal? And in addition to that, I want you to tell me the probability that that's what's going to happen. Tell me what it has to happen for it to be a good deal, and tell me the probability that it's going to be a good deal.
Number one is he's going to have to be re-signed. If this is a trade for just 10 games, I think automatically you lose the deal. It's just not a good use of resources. And I don't know if this is a Super Bowl team quite yet, especially with how the quarterback's been playing. So number one, they have to sign him. And number two, he has to make a considerable impact. So that can be measured in a ton of different ways. Whether it's pressures, whether it's opening up things for teammates, whether it's just they're going to go up against the big boys in the NFL in the next few months. They played against a little bit of a lighter schedule. We saw a better defense yesterday, but playing Philly's O-line and playing San Francisco with Trent Williams. If you want to be like that first-tier team, like we've considered them that second-tier NFC team. If they want to be that first-tier team, you need to have a great defensive line. And I think the Seahawks have had a good defensive line, and we don't know how that would have held up against some of the better teams. So I think he needs to be A, an impact player, and B, he needs to sign an extension. So I put that probably like 35%, somewhere around there. I think there's probably a 35% chance that he's not only good, but he also is signed. If he doesn't play well and they'll let him walk, it's a disastrous trade. Or if he plays really well and you want to sign him and then he walks, and they like kind of screw up their whole free agency like they did with Clowney that one year, and we're left with like Benson Mayoa as their only edge rusher, that's a fail. So there's a lot of ways they can screw this thing up. And the Seahawks typically don't do these trades with extensions in line. They would probably want to evaluate how he fits in, how he plays. So, 35% for me.
Dayna, same question to you. What would make this a success, and what's the probability of it being successful?
I agree with what Jeff said. I will say this, though, Seattle, maybe they wanted to do an extension and he's like, no, I want to see how I like it there. I mean, you have to remember they have a little bit of an upper hand there too, without, going into crazy money. And the guy's 29, so it's a second contract. So I don't think it'll cost them, the moon to get him, depending on how he plays this year. Now, if he's lights out, that's a whole different conversation. And hopefully they'll want to spend a little bit more money on that. But here's the thing. I think what makes this a successful trade is re-signing him if he plays well. I agree with that. I think that's just kind of the logical answer, right? Like he has to make an impact in one way or another. He has to make this defense better, and then they have to sign him. I give the probability a little bit more higher than Jeff. I don't think it's 35%. I think you've got a good 50, 55, 60% chance that he plays well here. I just really feel like they wouldn't have brought him in if they didn't think he was going to be a fit. And that they re-sign him because they're already talking about it. They're already putting that information out there. And the players are jackies here. I mean, all of them are. And so I think that the players who are going to be around, you have, Nino, and you have Jamal, and you have those guys who we know are going to be around are excited to have him here. So hopefully that'll be an influence too. But I think it's a higher probability than Jeff does, but the criteria is about the same. I mean, what else do you want? Re-sign him and have him be a good player.
Yeah, it's funny. Like for me, the amount of money that they have to sign also factors in a little bit, and how many years he is an impact player. But the funny thing is, I roughly the same thing you guys said, and my probability is around 30%, maybe 35%, and I'm okay with that. Because here's the thing.
Why so low? Aww.
Well, because like the reality is, Dayna, great players are rarely what did I do?
No, it's okay. It sounded like I don't know. The problem is Dayna.
No, the reality is I did not mean it that way. The reality is, Dayna, that when players move, when teams are willing to trade somebody, there's usually a reason. They're usually not.
Mhm.
It's very, very rare for a top shelf player to be moved and for them to then work out and play well. Like Jalen Ramsey's an example of a guy who did in, with the Rams, or Matthew Stafford. The Rams actually got very fortunate in making a few of these, which generally are like really, really bad ideas, and it worked out for them. But it worked out in short term even there. Like it wasn't even a long-term move.
Mhm.
I think that there's a decent chance. The odds are that the Seahawks will not get the value back that they put out. That's my best guess.
Mhm.
Now, that's a little bit of flawed logic though, because the kind of thought there is, oh, if they didn't get Leonard Williams by trading these 2 picks, then they would have addressed their defensive tackle depth issue some other way, either this year or next year, and they would have found somebody who was impactful. As I said when the show started, 13 years and the Seahawks have yet to draft an impact defensive tackle. They have really yet to sign one in free agency either. They've yet to acquire one via trade. So the Seahawks have not done well in this regard. I think their chances of getting a defensive tackle the quality of Leonard Williams any other way for the next 3 years is way below 30%. Way below 30%. So, I'm trying to keep it real. I don't think this is like a slam dunk. I think the odds are stacked against them. I think they made a bet. They made a gamble. And I think it's a wise gamble. I understand why they did it. In addition to that, here's the thing. Follow my logic here. All right. If they had drafted Jalen Carter this year, okay, would they have added a cornerback the level of Devin Witherspoon any other way?
No chance.
No chance. And would they have even thought to add let's say a cornerback the level of Leonard Williams within his rank of like the top 10 defensive tackle? Would they have added a top 10 corner, like a Leonard Williams-esque level corner? I'd say no way. So what this does is it gives you this opportunity to build a defense that now has a different ceiling than it would have had if they'd gotten Jalen Carter. We would have been talking Tariq Woolen, who's been having an okay year, Trey Brown, who's good, but a few years into his deal. I think this is his 3rd year. Mm-hmm. And we've been talking about Artie Burns and worrying about Kobe Bryant. So now you have the potential to get exactly what I said before. Have your cake and eat it too. I think that the potential for this defense, if this deal works out, is that this becomes a top 5 defense.
They already are, aren't they?
Depends on how you look. I mean,
okay. It depends on who's grading, right?
Who's grading, right? So, like, that's how I look at it. If you told me there's a 30% chance that the Seahawks could make a move to make them a top 5 defense over the next few years, is it worth it? Is it worth a 2nd round pick? Then I say, yeah, I think it's worth it. But yeah, I think there's a decent chance it won't work out.
and Brian, you are someone, I mean, self-admittedly, you are someone who really values those draft picks. I mean, that is a huge, huge deal to you. Like, huge, huge deal. Not everyone does. I've seen it in our chat. A lot of people are like, oh, it's just a 2nd round pick. And I kind of agree. If it's a low 2nd round pick and versus a high 3rd round pick, doesn't really matter. No, to you it does. And that's okay. I mean, it's just the way people look at it. So really, I mean, we won't know how this works out until the end of the season. And we can hope that it was worth that and that it continues to be worth that compared to what you could have got. I just think that a proven player for a 2nd round pick is a little safer bet than necessarily hopefully what they would get in the 2nd round.
Yeah. I mean, Jeff, there's a little bit of like game theory to this as well. I've heard, Dayna's point, people saying, hey, it's probably gonna be a low 2nd round pick. Well, DK was a low 2nd round pick. Zach Charbonnet was a low 2nd round pick. He's pretty valuable, depending on who you're asking. But there's this, you brought up this notion of Sheldon. It's another Sheldon Richardson trade, Jeff. I I get it. All those things make sense on the face.
Mhm.
But the fact that the Seahawks made a Sheldon Richardson trade that didn't work out really has no bearing on whether this trade's going to work out. You're on mute, Jeff.
Okay, I owe $1. It's a purely emotional response.
Yes.
Just because something didn't work out in the past doesn't mean it's going to happen again. I think that your tweet today was really good. That giving up draft picks for older players is typically bad team building, and giving up players for guys who are unsigned is even worse. And people who view things from like an analytical perspective and view things that way are going to hate this trade. And I understand it, because my first reaction was, that's an overpay. But I'll come back and I'll say this. Context does matter. And if you're evaluating this roster, I know every draft pick is good. They have the extra third from either Denver or New Orleans. I'm not quite sure who that is yet. But if you're really evaluating this roster, you think, okay, like, what are their long-term needs right now?
Mhm.
They don't have a lot of them. Like, if this was last year or the year before, I would have, like, coming out of 2021, they didn't have a tackle, they didn't have a corner, they didn't have an edge rusher. The fact that they've replaced all these premium spots in 2 drafts and great free agencies, and I would have crushed them for this trade. But if you look, like, they got 4 edge rushers essentially under contract. They got some work with the linebacker. But they have guys in house they can bring back. Their corners are in place. Their safeties are in place for another year. All 3 of them. Offensive line, Damian Lewis, a free agent. Wide receiver, running back, 2 young guys. There's not a lot of players you can really. So a second-round pick typically is horrible, but a late second-round pick on this roster, it might just be a depth player. So the fact that you can get an impact player, I think context does change things. And again, if you were the Giants, for example, or Arizona, and you made a trade like this, it's an F, instant F. But the fact that the Seahawks are at a different point in time, I know this was sort of the rationale that forced them into that Percy Harvin trade, which was terrible for many reasons, but I just view this very differently. And I don't see the kind of risk that they had with Percy Harvin.
Yeah.
It's
Jeff,
just offensive line, defensive line.
Jeff, it's funny you say that, because I saw a bunch of Raiders fans talking about this trade today, and they were talking with Mo, and he was like, "Oh, I love Leonard Williams, but there's no way I'd spend a second on him." And in the argument that was going on, it's like, of course you wouldn't, because you're the Raiders. You're not in a place where you should be doing that. You have an entire team to rebuild. You have to go from top to bottom. You can't just pick in one player and plug him in and have him change this team. Seattle is a different team. So your point is exactly right. If you look at some of these other teams, it would have been a disaster and idiotic for them to go after him. But for Seattle, to me, it made sense.
Yeah, like D. Eskridge, late second-round pick. Like, they right. If somebody knew that that's what you're getting, I don't think anyone would be that concerned. I do have to say, I am the sees all sides person, and I know that's annoying at times. Like, I'm generally happy about this trade. Like, I'm generally happy. I've been so frustrated about the lack of defensive tackle play for years on this team. I'm so envious when I watch other teams and I watch interior, the most effective way to affect a quarterback. There's all this love for edge rushers. You want to mess up an offense, you disrupt from the inside out. And so, like, the chance that we're going to be able to watch that even for 10 games as a fan, I'm like, fuck yeah. Like, I want to see that. I'm ready for it. I want to see Devin Witherspoon blitzing off the edge with no one paying attention because Leonard Williams. I want to see Jamal Adams blitzing up the middle or wherever, or Bobby Wagner, or Jordan Brooks, because Leonard Williams. I want all that. At the same time, please, folks, stop with this. They've got an extra 3rd-round pick so they can afford to get rid of this one. They will probably get a comp pick out of this if he doesn't sign. So they'll get a 4th. No, that's not how it works. Like, the same way I told Jeff, I don't think you can say just because the Sheldon Richardson trade was bad that this one's going to be bad. These are all independent decisions. You can only judge it by the value that you gave and the value that you get. And in this case, the Seahawks gave up a 2nd-round pick and a 5th-round pick for a guy in the 30-year-old that's in the last year of his deal. Either that's going to turn out to be good or bad. If he ends up signing elsewhere, we've seen that before. often doesn't end up in a comp pick because you have to not sign players in order to get the comp pick. And there's all sorts of other factors. So don't assume you're getting a comp pick. And plus that comp pick is another year out. So like it's even less valuable. And the fact that you got a extra third round pick has nothing to do with the fact that you also have a second round pick and you no longer do. So like, I just think that that's a really slippery slope of just trying to cope and come up with a reason why this trade makes sense. I don't think you have to do that here. Like either it'll be worth it or it's not, but they took a risk. And I think like what we just talked about, I think there's reason for them to do so.
There's nothing more overrated in the NFL than comp picks. I spent years listening to all these process-driven people praise the 49ers for all these comp picks they were getting. These comp picks come at the end of the third and fourth round, and sometimes fifth round and sixth round. There's like giant talent gaps there. Like everyone's like, oh my God, the 49ers have 4 comp picks the last 2 years. Go look and see who they drafted. They drafted a kicker. They drafted a 6th-string cornerback, 5th-string defensive tackle. Like comp picks are a very low rate. So I hate that that's become like the rationalization for a good move. And the Seahawks were guilty. Fans we were all guilty of this for years. Like, oh, look how many comp picks they're loading up for. Like they're not signing anyone in free agency. And then like they got like Amara Darboh.
Exactly. Yes.
So like I agree. Like for you to get a comp pick, it means you have to have a number of players coming in versus players coming out. If you lose Leonard Williams and with all these linebackers and tight ends they have that are set to be free agents, that means you're going to have more players leaving than coming in, which would be horrible for the team. I don't care about a end of fourth round pick in 2025.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes. Jesse Dunn with a super chat. Jesse Dunn with a super chat here says sack and pressure numbers have been mediocre. Giants fans seem to feel he was fine, but overpaid and overrated. Feels like a massive overpay, especially when Montez Sweat and Chase Young are still out there. So Jesse, I appreciate this. I appreciate the different perspectives. We need to cover these. First of all, let's just talk about Montez Sweat, Chase Young, different position, different players, edge players. They're not defensive tackles. They're not interior linemen. These are guys that you would add if you wanted to essentially, hedge your bet on Frank Clark, maybe cut Frank Clark even after you just signed him. Maybe Derek Hall doesn't play as much, things like that. They were not really, it's not an either or, I don't think in this case. So let's set that aside. We'll come back to edge in just a second. I think there's a case to be made that Leonard Williams has regressed a little bit. His numbers are down a little bit, and he is getting older. I'll tell you my view of it. I don't think he was particularly motivated in New York, and that's a very dangerous, fanish assumption to make. Oh, he's gonna love it in Seattle. He'll just play better. Defensive linemen wear down. They get older. It's a lot of work, and maybe he's just wearing down. So that's a possibility. But I've seen play from him recently that suggests to me he still has that level of play in him. And I think if he hit free agency, he would command a significant contract, even based on what he's doing. So I think he is still a very, very valuable player. And I think there's the potential that he could, I'll put the probability as higher than 30. I think there's like a 50 to 60% chance that he is a better version of himself in Seattle than what he was in New York.
Oh, I completely agree, because you have to remember the mindset. I know that a lot of Seahawks fans don't really pay attention to other, especially the East Coast teams. I get that. Totally get it. But if you could just watch these players play in New York, excuse my language, but the give a fuck was just not there. Like they could care less, right? They knew they weren't winning. They had a horrible offense. They were treating Saquon Barkley terribly. Like these players just didn't care because they knew they weren't going anywhere. They weren't getting anywhere. So you go from a last place team to a first place team that wants you there and has an option of getting to the postseason and beyond. Yeah, you're going to kick it up. Then throw in a contract year on top of it. Right. And so now I think, and having more than just one competent player around you, I think that that's going to be huge for him. it is fanish. It is like, oh, he's going to be so happy to be on my team. I get that. But at the same time, it's somewhat logical because when you're down in the dumps because your team is that crappy, it's hard to get up for a game. So we'll see. We'll see pretty quickly too, I think.
All right. I honestly could keep going for an hour plus. I'm going to ask you guys a few more questions and let you go. Jeff, what does this do for the Seahawks now this year? And I'm talking about all the facts on the table. The Seahawks are 5-2, first place in the NFC West, second place in the NFC overall. They've had one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. They've got one of the hardest schedules the rest of the way. Young team. Geno has been uneven. Like all that together. What does this move do for where the Seahawks rank in the NFC?
I think it's a big time floor raiser, not like a crazy ceiling raiser like an elite player is. But I think it just it brings your floor up as a team. I think over time they were going to be playing with fire with that defensive line group. And again, once the competition spikes up in the next month, I think they would have been a little exposed. We saw it a little yesterday at Cleveland. And so I think this does raise their floor. I think I saw them as a team that could win one playoff game max with the way things were going. I thought maybe they can win a wild card game. They just didn't have the horses. I think maybe this gives you a chance to win two. And that's a big deal. I think this gives you a chance. I didn't think San Francisco would kind of play defense the way they have. And if you look, I think Philly right now, we're going to see Philly. Philly looks like the best team in the NFC right now. And they're the best teams on the lines in the league. So having a guy who can be your best defensive lineman, but Doug Ferrer wrote it so well, they called him a force multiplier, meaning that he can make everyone better. And again, he's not an elite player, especially at this point in his career. He's pushing 30. He was the number 2 guy in New York. But we've seen him take over games. Like there was that game where the Seahawks lost to Colt McCoy where Brian wore a bag over his head. That's a famous game in Seahawk, Real Hawk Talk lore. Go watch that game. The best player in the field was Leonard Williams. And that was 2020, I think, or 2021. I can't remember. I think it was 2020. So it's been a couple of years, but they're just, again, the Seahawks don't have a defensive lineman right now that's capable of doing that. As much as we like Reed or Draymond Jones has been good at what he does. So having someone that could take over a game and be a game wrecker and just, I think that multiplies things for Boye Mafe, for our Jones, for a Reed. And that has a chance to just take a group that looked pretty good at all levels of the defense right now and make them better. It can help in the run game. It can help in the pass game. So I think this is, again, more of a floor raiser than a ceiling raiser.
It's interesting. Dayna, how about you?
Kind of look at it two ways, on the field and off the field. On the field, I think that Jeff's right. He just makes everyone around him better. It's one more person on there to really disrupt those lines and go after some of those high power offenses that we are going to have to deal with here very quickly, including Sunday. And they say that he'll probably play Sunday, and that'll be good to see because Baltimore's no joke, right? So we're going to have to really kind of step it up for that. And so I just think that he's going to make everyone around him better and make a huge impact probably pretty quickly. Off the field, I saw a couple of interesting conversations because you guys know I love to look at what the fans' reactions are to everything, right? Because, we have a bunch of analysts around here, but I like to look at what the fans do. So the 49ers are pissed. Those fans are mad, and they were going off. Poor Mike Silver today, and I don't say poor Mike Silver very often, but he was fielding stuff left and right of it's like, why are the Niners just sitting on their hands when the Seahawks and the Eagles are getting better? We're not doing anything. We're terrible. Now, granted, they're coming off of 3 losses, right? And so I think that to a certain extent, it puts the league, or at least the NFC, on notice that Seattle plans on being contended with. They plan on being a problem. They plan on being a disruptor. And so I think that's not something that they've had in quite a few years now. They've always been that plucky team who manages to get into the playoffs, right? And so I think that this shows that they're more serious about that. And so I think psychologically for the fan base and other fan bases, it just takes Seattle to another level that they are trying to do something. And isn't that what we've been asking for? Just do something. And then they finally did it. So I think that it's kind of twofold on and off the field, but I just think it's going to be good all the way around.
Yeah, it's very hard for me to, get into a deal that goes against my roster building tendencies. And I really love the way the Seahawks have played the last 2 seasons in the roster building. I think their drafts have been excellent. I think that they have acquired and kept draft picks. They have signed guys, undrafted free agents. I think they've really turned this roster around in the right way. But I don't think there's any other way to look at this than this Seahawks team is considerably better than the one that finished the game yesterday. Period. Like, they are meaningfully better. If Leonard Williams is just what he was in New York, like not any better at all, just what he was in New York, this team's meaningfully better than it was yesterday. If Leonard Williams actually steps up his play and regains some of the form he's had before, where you're talking about a top 6 disruptor in the defensive line, then I think we don't know what the hell we have, folks. I think we can talk about it. 1 win in the playoffs, 2 wins in the playoffs. Sure. I would have told you were batshit crazy 3 weeks ago that the 49ers would lose 3 games in a row, including one to the Cleveland Browns and to Kirk Cousins, so like, I would have never thought then that there was serious conversations about whether Brock Purdy should be benched and that they should play Sam Darnold. And I would have never, ever guessed that. I would have never guessed that their defense would be falling apart and giving up chunks of yards to everybody. And people are saying they got to fire their defensive coordinator and that they got to make multiple trades just to be a contender. Would have never thought that. I don't think the Eagles have looked that good. I think they've looked okay. Jalen Hurts is dealing with a knee injury. Like, we don't know what we have. What I will say is, before this trade, I would have told you I thought the Seahawks had a real chance of being significantly better at the end of this year than they are right now. They've got enough young players who I think are building and learning, and enough new players that are coalescing. I think this team is built to have a classic Pete Carroll flourish to the end of the season. And I don't think I'd said that about a lot of teams. So I'm not just Pollyanna. I think that's my feeling of how this roster is built. And now I think that I do think they've raised their ceiling. I also think Jeff's right that they've raised their floor. And I can't tell you what it's going to mean. And that's part of what I'm looking forward to seeing. Like, I enjoy watching the Seahawks defense play now. I'm going to enjoy it more. And that's awesome. So, last question I have for you, then I'll let you guys go, is about the 49ers. Because I think there's one more day, like 1 o'clock, I think Eastern time, maybe tomorrow. I can't remember, but it is the trade deadline. Assumption is that they were going to make at least one move, maybe 2 moves, maybe a cornerback, maybe another edge rusher. They have like 40 million. They have some crazy amount of cap space this year that the expectation has been that they were going to roll that over to next year to cover all the salaries they're going to have to cover next year. They got Brandon Ayuk. They got to extend. They got a lot of contracts. But at the same time, it does give them the opportunity to do the opposite of what the Seahawks do. They could potentially take on a lot of salary this year if they wanted to, instead of having the opposing team pay, and potentially give less draft pick compensation as a result. Seattle traded more draft pick compensation to pay less this year. 49ers could do the opposite. Jeff, what's your expectation with the 49ers? Do they make a move? Do they make 1 move? Do they make 2 moves? Do they make no moves?
I don't think they're going to make a move. I think there's just a lack of players that kind of fit what their timeline is. Some of the bigger players available right now are Sweat and Chase Young, who are more of like the guys that teams are going to want to sign beyond this year. They can't really do that. And the price they're going to have to pay, the Niners are going to really need draft picks moving forward because they got a lot of cap problems. So they already kind of made their move with Randy Gregory. There's not a lot of snaps left for edge rushers. Maybe they pick up like someone for like a 5th-round pick, but I heard Kyle talking today, and I was listening to his press conference. He didn't seem very optimistic, like anything was in the pipeline. Maybe he was playing coy. He's certainly done that before. I just think it's a weird market right now, and like the team to watch maybe is the Vikings with Daniel Hunter, because Cousins is out, their season's probably over. So that might be the guy that fits the 49ers because he's a rental one-year guy. But I think he's going to have to cost a second-round pick or a third-round pick. And I don't know if I see the Niners doing that. I think they might just say, okay, we're going to get better internally, and we'll roll with that. I don't know if outside help is going to fix what's going on there.
Dayna, how about you?
I don't trust them as far as I can throw them. And so therefore, I'm pretty sure that they're going to do something. And it's going to be something that's going to piss me off because it's usually, I mean, that's what happened last year with Christian McCaffrey. I'm like, really? Right? So irritating. But at the same time, Jeff has a point. Which player, what makes sense there? You know, they already have so much money going out in the next 2 to 3 years, you know, and they're going to need to keep some of that cap space unless they plan on dumping, which just doesn't sound like something that they would do. But so I expect them to, the pessimist in me expects them to do something and get something big. It's going to make me mad. But at the same time, I can't really think of who that would be. You're right, Hunter, but I don't know. I think that he'll probably go somewhere else. But I think that I can see them doing something. I just don't know what. And I don't know what would help them because they have such a strong starting, you know, group as it is. So,
yeah.
But probably just to irritate me.
I think that for all the almost the opposite reasons about why we've been critical of this trade, you know, or some there's been some criticism of this trade for Seattle are really apply well for the 49ers. They have to be all in this year. Like they are built to win it this year. They've got contract stuff that's going to be hellish. They're not going to be able to keep this crew together. It makes all the sense in the world for them to get a rental player. They can't afford to sign another guy to a long-term deal. If they draft a second rounder, a third rounder, even a first rounder next year, chances that player is going to come in and actually play on this team is probably not that high. And so I think they got to be all in. And I would expect them. I think Danielle Hunter is exactly who is on my mind. Like, I think all of a sudden that makes a bunch of sense. And I think that they'll cut Randy Gregory if they have to. They won't care about that. I think pass rush is going to be a primary. They've always valued the defensive line. Like they clearly, and they've spent a lot of first round picks on it. I think that's one move. I don't know if there's a corner that's available for them to get, but if there is, they might look for it. So I expect them to at least make one move on the defensive line. We'll see. If they don't, it's going to be very interesting because that fan base is on edge and they want blood. So that'll be interesting to watch. The other thing to be aware of, folks, I don't know if the Seahawks are done. And I mean that in both ways. I think that the Seahawks, if they get, I don't think they're going to be hunting for stuff, but if there's something like, I think Carl Lawson for the Jets, edge rusher, young guy who's been a productive edge rusher before, if they can get him for a 5th round pick or a conditional pick because the Jets are just looking for anything, I wouldn't be surprised if the Seahawks pull a trigger on that. It wouldn't shock me at all.
What about D. Eskridge for Carl Lawson?
Well, so that's the other thing. I think there's going to be some players potentially going the other way. I think Michael Jackson is a potential move elsewhere. I think Artie Burns is a potential move elsewhere. I think D. Eskridge is a potential move elsewhere. So we'll see. I don't know on the offensive line, but like maybe I'm trying to think of any other players, but I think there could be players that they're moving out as well. So we'll see.
They should trade Jake Curran to the 49ers.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Oh my God.
Wouldn't that be nice? I like Jake. I just don't want him.
He's a good player.
Yeah. All right. Anything else before I let you you all have released to your nights? Jeff, any last thoughts, last words?
If you want a good kick, go on, pull up David Lombardi's Twitter. He tweets like he's a member of the team, and he's dealing with a lot of stress. So his favorite team is down and out. We got to enjoy this while we can. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about if these guys were going to lose it all. So if you want some good Twitter, pull up Grant Cohn, pull up Dave Lombardi. But man, it's this Baltimore game just got a lot more interesting.
Oh yeah. I mean, you're so funny. You're so right about the weeks ago. You remember at the first game, kind of as a tongue in cheek, but kind of serious, I was posting the Tankathon rankings of Seahawks.
I was serious. I was totally serious.
Right? Unreal how
When
Pete
those
Carroll does
tackles
this.
went out, I thought they were going to look like they did in Cincy every week.
It's unreal. Okay. Dayna, any closing thoughts for you?
No, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens this week. I want to see if Frank Clark can get a little better this week, and we'll be able to talk about that on Wednesday. But as for this trade and as for everything, I've had a hell of a good sports 36 hours. It has been so good because Seattle won and Kansas City lost to Denver. Made me laugh. And, all the 49ers lost, but then Sporting Kansas City kicked the shit out of St. Louis. I mean, it was it was really great for us. So I'm glad that the high could continue today with the trade. So
love it. Well, this move absolutely wrecked my day. I was not able to focus on work. So thank you and screw you, Seahawks, for that. Thank you. If you haven't already, give the show a like. Subscribe to the channel because you don't know when we're gonna have another emergency pod. I could hang up from this thing and they can make another deal and we'll be right back on. And then go to patreon.com/hawkblogger, sign up right now, get access to the Slack channel where the conversation continues. And I mean, folks, become a Ring of Honor member. I keep telling you, it is a good thing to do. Not only can you, if you got anything you want to advertise, we will make that part of the show. We'll add it to the blog. But also you get to join us for a wonderful steak dinner here coming up near Thanksgiving. So do it now. Ring of Honor, only a few spots left. And until you hear more from us or more from the Seahawks, take care. Have a wonderful evening. Go Hawks.